Hi, everyone. I'm Sweet Melba. Thanks for joining me. Stories. I'm always talking about stories here on my channel, and I love stories. And it's really, I think about those stories that have just really been told over and over again, whether that's from my parents or my grandparents or stories that my parents told me about their brothers and sisters growing up and my grandparents. I mean, there's so many types of family stories. And as I shared on my last video, I really enjoy remembering those, thinking about the people who shared those stories. And it just kind of occurred to me that it's these stories that we remember that have really shaped who we became and um, some of our values and whatnot in our life. And I think that's really special. And I think we don't probably realize just how important those stories are. Recently I was reading a post on a Facebook page that I follow, and they shared a really brief kind of a saying, I guess you'd say, that we die three times. We die our physical death. We die when the last person who knew us is gone. And we die a third time when our name is no longer spoken. And I was like, wow. But then I started thinking about it, and we keep those people alive by sharing their stories, and that's important. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that today. So thanks for joining me. I think I've always loved stories. And I think too, as I've gotten older, I appreciate them more. I think I retell them more than I used to. But it just at this time, going into retirement and midlife, for me, I'm finding, I think, that I have more time to reflect on these stories and why they're important and the people in my life who've influenced me and shared their perspective and shared their stories about growing up and experiences. And that's why I think stories are so important is they pass down life lessons. They pass down important remembrances about challenges or experiences that people had in their life and how we might all can appreciate those more and maybe learn from those. So I think at this point in my life, I just reflecting more on those and the impact that they had on my life growing up. Kind of what again, what influenced some of the things I came to really appreciate and enjoy in life. And that continuing to tell those stories and remember them are important at this point in our life as we pass those on to a next generation or to others like I do here on my channel as a way of hopefully reminding you that your family stories are important and they're probably more important than we normally think about. We think, well, it's just a story or just my life experience, and I don't know that anybody else would really want to hear that, but I think there's so much for us all to learn in that. And so I love hearing stories and I love sharing them. I think a lot of times the stories we remember are really about the simple things in life. The simple enjoyments or simple activity that we didn't think much about but ended up having so much meaning for us. So, family traditions that you do, or stories about a birthday party or a special vacation you went on. And again, at the time, we don't think a lot about them, but there was probably something in there that really stayed with you all these years. And so thinking back and remembering those, I think is just so enriching to our life. And I think we remember those for a reason because they were important. So, sharing them with others in your family or friends, capturing them somehow to be able to be preserved and shared, that's important. And I think we all need to take a little more time in our life to do that because one day they might be forgotten. And it's a great way, again, to preserve that so that they're not forgotten and those individual stories are not forgotten. So, in my last video, I was talking about how much I really enjoyed listening to my grandma's stories, my grandma in Alabama. But it's not just her, it's the stories that my mom and dad tell, that my grandma and grandpa used to tell me, that cousins have shared. And it just really, I think, is a way for us to preserve our family history. And that's always been really important to me. And we have, I think, opportunities in our life to capture those. And sometimes we miss those opportunities. So, if you have a chance in meeting with family members where people are sharing their stories, try and find a way to capture those. Whether you just hit record on your phone and say, "Hey, would you mind if I recorded this?" And maybe it's just the voice that the storytelling that you're capturing, or doing a video that you're preserving that for your family and for you to look back on in future generations. I think that's a way to connect generations. And I think it's also really important, I know it is for me, for all of us to understand where we've come from, where our families have come from. What were those experiences that our parents had and the choices they made and why they made those choices? And then our grandparents and other relatives and ancestors. How did we get where we are? We got here because of the people who came before us. And that's always been an important part of my life. And I'm glad that at a young age, I learned the value of that. The reason that came about for me was in 1980. I was 10. And there was a relative in our family who had been doing research for decades on the family. And she put together a book and she had it bound. And she sent out a notice to my parents, my aunts and uncles, and other people in the family, distant, relatives and whatnot, asking if we wanted a copy of that book. And I can't remember how much it was, but there was like a handwritten form that she made, like say back in the day. And pretty much everybody in my dad's family, so my dad's side of the family, bought the book. And I remember when the book showed up and going through there, and she had asked people to send photographs. She compiled all this in the books. This was years before she had requested these stories and photographs. And it was something that was central to her life. And when that book arrived and I got to sit down and go through it, both with my dad and just on my own, it just sparked something in me that lasted a lifetime. And it's why I decided really to pursue getting a degree in history. I just loved that. I loved the research and hearing those stories. And I found a way to continue to do that throughout my life, to always work on genealogy and doing more to the family stories. And I was able to do a lot of research to add to her research. So again, it has been a important part of my life, a central part of my life, of remembering and capturing family stories, and on into my career and just the hobby in a sense too, of just collecting that and doing that research and being able to share that with others, in helping them do their research, and piecing that together. And I think intuitively I kind of always knew that by doing that research and finding those family names and stories, even if they weren't mine, it was a way of keeping those people alive. You know, it was keeping their name and their story relevant. And I think all of us can find that. So I hope that that's something that you've had the pleasure of doing, or if you're interested in kind of doing that now. There's so many resources online that allow us to do that. But again, it's a connection, it's preservation of those stories and knowing, 100 years ago, what was our families doing that continued to make the future generations able to do what they went on and did. I think it's important to remember that. And it connects us all. So our stories are important. And I think we should take the opportunities both to capture those, research those, collect those, and share those with others. And there may be some, that don't necessarily appreciate hearing those now. They will one day. It's surprising to me how many people that I come in contact with who said, I wish I had written that story down or recorded it or did the audio of a relative telling that story. I missed that opportunity. So don't miss that opportunity if you can to capture that and preserve those people's stories and your own because those are important as well. And from a legacy standpoint, I talked about that in my last video. Again, I really don't think it's those accomplishments, the titles we may have had, the awards we may have received, or that large estate, or whatever the estate is, right? I don't think that's what lasts. I think what lasts are the stories because the stories tell you who those people were and what was important to them, what they chose to pursue in their life, what they were willing to sacrifice for, both for themselves, their family, and future generations. I think that's what legacy is. And it's the continuation of stories and activities that made us who we were and that other people remember. And so, again, preserving that and sharing that, I think, is really important. I think those stories are, in a way, the language of our legacy, so to speak, right? We can't share that if we don't reflect and remember on it and find a way to share that with others. So I think it's worth the effort for all of us to try and do that a little bit better than maybe we have in the past. So if this is something that's important to you and how you and your family share family stories or capture those family stories. I'd love to hear that in the comments. I really enjoy that aspect and hearing other people's stories. Just because I'm not connected to them, I'm not related to them. In a way, I have a way of helping them preserve that as well by listening to those stories or helping somebody research those stories or just reading about them. And I think that's important for all of us. I think we all learn from those. So our stories really are important. So sharing stories for me has always been a way to remember the people who have been important in my life. It's a way to remain present about those that came before, um, how we're living our lives today, and how we're going to share those with other people. And it's a connection, as I say, past, present, and future. There's not many opportunities in our life, I think, to be able to do that, that continuum of connection. And so for me, that's why I have really focused on my channel being a way to share stories, remember stories, think about those individuals that were important in my life and that influenced me or presented challenges for me that I learned from. And again, I hope it's a way for you, those that are watching the channel, to maybe do the same in your own life. Maybe you haven't thought about those things in a while, but they're important. And so that's really what I try to do here on my channel is to reflect on those, share those, and encourage others to do the same because I think that is what articulates for us a life well lived. And they all add different levels of insight, encouragement, and bring a smile, don't they? A lot of those stories do. Funny stories and different ways of looking at things. So think it's all beneficial for us, again, towards a life well lived. So I'm going to continue to do that here on my channel. And if you enjoy hearing some of those stories, I hope you'll continue to join me, subscribe to the channel, and follow along. And I hope share in the comments as well. So I really do think our stories matter more than we think they do. And you never know who's going to benefit from you sharing a story, whether it's your own personal story that you may think, this doesn't sound very exciting, but there's probably a lesson to be learned in there, or just to make somebody smile and laugh at a funny story. So I think it's important. But as I mentioned early on in the video, when I read that reference to, you know, keeping stories alive about people, what continues to keep their name present and their impacts and their legacy. That's important. And I think we all can do that by sharing our stories and their stories. So, again, I hope you've enjoyed just the reflection today about why our stories matter more than we think they do. And let's all try and keep the name and the legacy of people in our lives alive by sharing those stories. So thanks for joining me today. Again, I hope you'll follow along if you've enjoyed the video. And I'd love to hear again in the comments, who is somebody in your life that you love sharing stories about because they were so impactful or influential in your life? Again, I'd love to hear that. So thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time for Sunday on the Porch. All right, bye-bye.